Aloha! Welcome to the G'day Sally Show. I'm Sally Squires, entertaining the world. And tonight I'm going to read a story called Mamalita Maria to the Rescue, and that is from my book Zig Zag Zog. The head of the maracas flew off its stick and hit the floor with a very loud bang. Papalito Pepe stopped playing his music immediately. Don't worry, Mamalita Maria, I'll get it for you. And he walked over to the fallen maracas and picked it up. But sadly there was a large split in the side of the round end. He inspected it carefully. Turning to Mamalita Maria, he said, I may be able to fix it for you. That night, as he sat at his workbench, he inspected the maracas more closely. He could see the beads inside. It was the beads that made the noise when the maracas were shaken. But as he bent in closer, he could see what looked like one of the beads shining a bright golden colour. I wonder why that bead is a different colour to the others, he said to himself. Taking out his pocket knife, he tried to reach the bead without breaking open the maracas. He pushed a little harder, and suddenly the maracas head broke open, and all the beads spilt out onto his workbench. Quickly he scooped them up before they had time to fall on the floor. As they fell, they each made a sound, but the sound of the golden bead was different to the other beads. He took out his magnifying glass and held the golden bead up to the light. It didn't look like the dark polish on the other beads. It seemed to be a golden bead through and through. As he examined it closely, he thought he could see an inscription or some writing on the bead. Polishing his magnifying glass, he held the bead very steady and peered through the shiny glass. Yes, he said to himself, there is some writing on this bead. I wonder what it says. He also noticed that the golden bead was quite a lot bigger than the other beads. As he looked closer and closer at the golden bead, he could make out some letters. It looks like S-O-S, he said. S-O-S, he repeated to himself. Why, those are the letters for help. I wonder who needs help. Just then, Mamalita Maria joined him at his workbench, and he showed her the golden bead. She held it between her thumb and forefinger. I think there's an opening in this bead, she said, and she showed Papalito Pepe where she could see the opening. If you look closely, she said, you can see a tiny thread of silk coming out of the bead. Papalito Pepe agreed with her that there did seem to be a tiny silken thread. Maybe there is more of a message inside the bead, said Mamalita Maria. We should try to open the bead a little more. So she went to find her finest pair of silver tweezers to use to open the bead in case there was a message inside. When she returned with the tweezers, Papalito Pepe handed her the bead. Slowly and carefully, Mamalita Maria grasped the silken thread with her finest tweezers, and she slowly pulled out the thread. She had only pulled out a little when it stopped coming. So breathing very slowly, she pulled a little harder, and out came a knot. Mamalita Maria could see that there was something tied to the knot. So carefully, very carefully, she pulled again, and a little wad of silk came out of the bead. I wonder what it is, she said to Papalito Pepe. She laid the tiny wad of silk down on the workbench, and then carefully, very carefully, Mamalita Maria teased out the silk with her tiniest of tweezers. Soon she could see some writing on the silk wad. Slowly she could work out the words. Held was the first word, then by giant were the next two words, in woods were the last two. Mamalita Maria was alarmed. Someone is being held by a giant in the woods, she said. We must rescue them, whoever they are. Papalito Pepe shook his head. But Mamalita Maria, they might not be there any longer. We have had those maracas for 2 months, and who knows how long ago they wrote this message. But Mamalita Maria was determined. If someone was being held captive by a giant, she would not let them stay there. She must do something. Well, I will go into the woods and look for a giant's lair and see if there's anyone being held captive, she said. She went back into her kitchen and packed food and water in case the person was hungry or thirsty. As she was about to leave, Papalito Pepe came in with her coat. He was also ready to go with her to find out if there was still someone in the giant's lair. It was getting dark as they left, so they took 2 strong lanterns with them to light their way. They didn't often go into the woods, but when they needed new maracas, they would go to the woods because they bought their maracas from an old woodcarver who lived deep inside the woods. Finally, they knocked on the door of the woodcarver's cottage and asked him if he had seen any giants in the wood. "Oh, yes," he said. "There's a giant who lives in a cave at the very deepest part of the woods, but I've only been there once when he sent a message that he was ill and he needed some of my special herbal medicines. I was only there for a short time on my way to the village to sell my maracas in the market." "And did you see anyone else while you were there?" Mamalita Maria asked him. "I didn't see anyone, but I thought I'd heard someone just behind the window to the other room when I put down my bag of maracas," he said. "I had some that were finished and some that were not finished, as the giant's message had interrupted my work." "Did you ask the giant if he was alone?" asked Papalito Pepe. "Yes, but he growled at me and told me it was none of my business, and of course he was alone, so I left quite quickly," said the woodcarver. Mamalita Maria was getting more anxious. "Can you show us where the giant lives?" she asked. "Certainly," he said, "but I don't want to have to see that giant again." As they approached the cave where the giant lived, the woodcarver stopped them. "That is where he is," he said. "I'll leave you here. I won't go any closer." Mamalita Maria and Papalito Pepe crept up to the giant's cave. They were not sure what they would find or how much danger they would be in. As they approached the cave entrance, they could hear a loud roar. Worried, they advanced slowly. When they were close enough, they could see that the giant was asleep just inside the door. They were terrified they would wake him. Now what were they to do? As they crept silently even closer, Mamalita signaled to Papalito that she could perhaps just squeeze past the giant while he was asleep. Papalito was worried that the giant would awaken as Mamalita crept past him into the cave. But he felt that if he stood guard, he could deflect the giant's attention away from Mamalita if he did wake up. Quietly, so quietly that you could hear a pin drop, Mamalita Maria crept past the giant. She looked all around the room, and then she noticed a tiny speck of light coming from a small window at the back of the main room. That must be where the giant's prisoner is, she thought. There didn't seem to be a door, so she tapped very gently on the window to alert anyone who was on the other side of the window. Suddenly a small face appeared. When the face saw that it was not the giant who had knocked on the window, it smiled and smiled. Mamalita Maria smiled back so that the person would know she was there to help him or her. Out of her bag, Mamalita Maria pulled a long, thin knitting needle, which had some wool tied to one end. Trying to be as quiet as she could, she placed the knitting needle at the bottom of the window and wiggled it until it slid under the bottom of the window. Then she signaled to the prisoner to pull the knitting needle through. The wool was thin enough to go under the windowsill along with the needle. Then, working together, she and the prisoner pulled on both ends of the wool, which is very strong in case you didn't know, and slowly the window began to slide open. Mamalita Maria put her fingers to her lips so the prisoner would not make any sound. As soon as the window was open wide enough, she helped the prisoner out through the window. Carefully, they both tiptoed past the giant and rejoined Papalito. Carrying the lanterns back through the woods, they all kept quiet until they reached a small clearing where Mamalita gave the escapee some food and water. "We'll talk when we have reached our cottage," she said. Once they reached the cottage and she had made the escapee comfortable, they could hear his story. As Mamalita Maria and Papalito Pepe listened intently, the escapee told them about how he had come to be a prisoner of the giant. "One day I was cooking at the town restaurant where I'd been working for 5 years, he said. "And I know you're wondering what our escapee's name is, so I'll tell you. The escapee's name is Santo Santana. Now, nobody in that town had ever seen the giant, but they had all heard about him. One day he came crashing into town. He said he wanted to know who was the best cook in town, and someone told him that it was me," said Santo. "So to my surprise, he just picked me up and carried me back to his cave and made me cook for him, from that day to this. Several times I tried to escape, but he always caught me before I could get away." "But how did you get the message onto that golden bead of the woodcarver's maracas?" asked Papalito Pepe. "I made some soup for the giant and put some poison weeds in it to make him sick. I thought I might be able to get away if he sent me to get help, but he kept me locked up and sent a message with a passing gypsy to the woodcarver. When the woodcarver put down his bag of maracas, I could see that some of them were not finished. I had found a bag of golden beads that the giant had hidden in his cave, and I had carved the message on the bead. I made the silk words from a spider's nest in the room where he had me locked up. Santo Santana smiled. I am so grateful that you found my message. I thought I would never get away from that giant. So that's my story in my book Zigzag Zog, and it's called Mamalita Maria to the Rescue. You know, Hawaii is a microcosm of the world, with people here from all over the world. And Noa Noa Hawaii is a microcosm of the traditional arts of the world, with beautiful patterns from many countries. They've been in business for more than 40 years with wonderful Hawaii-designed batik clothing. Their hand-dyed and handmade clothes have patterns that are based on traditional kapa and tapa designs from Hawaii, Polynesia, Micronesia, Indonesia, even New Zealand and Africa. So check out the wonderful items that Noa Noa has on their website, www.noanoahawaii.com.